Hi guys, welcome to today's video. Hope you're doing fine. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you for the subscribers that I gained. I already have 18 now, super exciting. I like this thing about YouTube that you have no idea who's actually watching your videos, but somebody out there is watching them, and hopefully in this case learning something. Big thank you to the Reddit user Truth Untrenched. Sorry about that. Truth Untrenched for giving me feedback that Stata isn't supposed to be written in caps lock. True, true. So I did change that, and I hope I didn't offend the hardcore fans of Stata by writing it in caps lock first. We learn and improve. Um, there was a second comment from another Reddit user. I won't say his name or her name because it was a private message. That user gave me the idea for this video, today's video, which will be about importing data and about cleaning the data for use in Stata and how to deal with missing information. These are actually all very crucial and very basic steps that you encounter in every project. You get data from somewhere and it's in some shape, and it can take a while to actually prepare the data to bring it in a format that is actually useful for whatever your analysis is. So thank you very much, guys, for directly contacting me, for reaching out. As I said, I want this channel to be interactive, so this is very helpful. So now let's get started with the video. We will work with this data. Oops. This is government expenditure on education in percentage of GDP. This is published by the World Bank, and you see the link up here. So yeah, World Bank data, government expenditure on education expressed in percentage of the GDP. If we look at the website, here we have a line, it says world, so I guess this is for the entire world, like the average. And then we have all countries and economies. So Afghanistan, most recent year is 17, most recent value 3.9% of GDP was invested into education. And we have this for a lot of countries, like a lot of countries. Okay, good. So let's say we have some project that we where we need this data. We want to work with this government expenditure on education. So on the bottom right side, we have different ways to download this data. I personally like CSV, which is comma separated values. The CSV data sets, they just tend to be pretty small. And so we click this and we download the data. We click save. It will be stored as a zip archive. So already it's CSV data, which doesn't take too much space, and then it's even compressed. Let's go, we download this. Download went super fast. So now let's look at the data. Okay, I double click this. I wait for the, nope, I'm not buying it. Okay. I extract the 3 files in this folder. Okay, so now I have no idea about this data. So we have 3 data sets and they're all pretty small. So let's look at what these 3 data sets actually are. We just open it. I use Excel to have a first look. Okay, here I have the countries, short name of the country, and here I have values. Okay, this seems to be the row containing the years, and these are the values. Okay, so this is pretty much the, let's say, the main content of this data set. What's in the other files? Metadata country. Let's look at this. Okay, we have a country code, which is the abbreviation which we saw before. Oh, okay, so they assign the different countries to different regions, to income groups, and then there's some notes. Okay, nope. And there's metadata on the indicator. Let's look at this. Okay, that's oh, it just says the indicator code. So this is probably so you can identify this measure when you use other World Bank data. Here it says government expenditure on education total. We already knew that. And here it gives us more information expressed as a percentage of GDP. Includes expenditure funded by transfers from international. Okay, good. So this is basically just more data. So the file we want to be working with mainly is going to be the first file. It's also the biggest file. So let's load this file into Stata. We open Stata. Now we go on File, Import, and here you see the different file types that you can import into Stata. As I said, I usually work with CSV, but you see there are other formats, some of which I never used before. So in our case, we go on CSV. This window comes up. We hit Browse right away, and then we choose this file. Now we're going to open. Okay, and now in this section we get a very useful, actually, we get a preview of what the dataset will look like. So v1, variable 1 is the country name, v2 is the abbreviated country name, etc. And then these variables are all the values that we actually care about. And we see that in this row, there are the years saved in this row. Okay, so right now I'm just going to take the data in as is. I'm not changing anything else. So what you can do is you can here where it says use first row for variable names, pretty often you say yes, do it, so always. But in our case it's not really useful because the first row is actually not the variable name. So row 1, you see for these variables it's empty, for instance. So there's no point in using the variable name as the first row. So I just go ahead and click OK. Good, so the dataset has been loaded. So what we do in this very moment is we open the do file editor and we actually begin a new do file. To open the do file editor, you go on do edit and you hit enter. Okay, it's a virgin do file, there's nothing written on it yet. We use a do file because when you do this kind of work, like importing data and then cleaning the data, there's a lot of try and error involved. So you sometimes make mistakes, and if you just typed one command after the other in this window, there is no easy way to go back fast for in your work. So the do file is actually it's a program. It's like a mini program that only Stata can read, and it's just a list of all the commands that you would enter here. You just enter them here, and then with a very short like press Ctrl D, you can just execute the entire do file, and it will do a lot of commands fast. But this will get clearer as we work in it. So let's start. We call this step A, download the data. So we want everything to be nicely reproducible. So we're going to, I can close this, don't need this. So we're going to say exactly where we got the data from. Obtained CSV data from here. All right, that was step A. Now we save this do file. We'll save as, and we save this as, let's say, education. Okay, save. Now the next step is step B, import the data. And what I do now, I just hit page up, and I copy this this exact command that we made, and I put clear in the end, so I can overwrite the data set that's already in Stata right now. Okay. So this stuff is green here. You can see these 3 lines are green. This is because I started them with a little star asterisk. And basically, whenever you put a star at the beginning of a line, Stata will just skip that respective line, so there is no code that Stata executes. In contrast, if we don't put a star, Stata will actually run the code. So this will be the first line of code that Stata will run. So it's import, and then it's delimited. That's just so Stata knows it's a CSV file. And then this is the entire path to the file. And this is comma, so after the comma the options start, and here it's clear. So that means we tell Stata to load this file into memory and to just clear whatever was in the memory before. Okay, I can just hit Ctrl A to select everything, and I hit Control D, and then Stata executes what we just did. Okay, if I hit BR, I can look at this data set. So we already know it starts with 2 empty lines. You can see they're empty for everything, so that's something we'll have to clean. Then this is weird first, some weird symbols. Here we have the country name, so we will want to rename this variable called v1 as country. v2 is a country code, which is just the abbreviation of each country name, which is kind of redundant, so we could delete it. And then the indicator name is the same across the whole data set because it's the one variable that we downloaded, which is this government expenditure on education. This is the indicator code, which I believe is linked to the World Bank database structure, so this is useless for us. Here we have in a row, we have years from 1960 to 2018. And here below we have values. So this is the actual heart, this is the actual data that we want. It's stored in this area. And here we have a variable that's just completely empty. Okay, so this is all very normal stuff that you see a lot when you first import a data set. So now let's start with cleaning the data. So we go step C, clean the data. And the first thing we do here is we drop unnecessary variables. Okay. So looking again at the browse, we have country name. This is necessary, we want that. We do not need variable 2 because it's simply the same as country name, just in a different format. We don't need it at the moment. Variable 3 is the same for each observation, so it's also useless, and variable 4 is also useless. So we just tell Stata to drop variable 2, variable 3, and variable 4. Okay. I select only this line, I hit Control D, and what Stata did is it dropped those variables. Okay, you can see it goes now variable 1 to variable 5. If you look in the editor, you see that we have the country variable, and then we have all those years and the values. Values are missing for most of the older years, 1960 years, and yeah, it starts to get populated around 1970. Okay. So that's the first thing we did. Now, what we also want to do is we want to rename the variables. Because, yeah, for instance, right now, this first column, it shows us the country name, but the variable is called v1. So that's highly unintuitive. So we just type rename v1 country. Okay. We select, we go Control D, and we see that the variable has been renamed country. Here you go, country. Okay. And now these variables, they indicate years. And what I'm going to do here, so for instance, if you think about, okay, so let me give you an example. So in this row, we have Afghanistan. So all the values that follow to the right here relate to Afghanistan. So we know, for instance, that in Afghanistan in 1971, the expenditure on education was 1.16% of GDP. In 1972, for Afghanistan, the expense was 1.117% of GDP. So as you can see, these variables are actually not named very well. So we are going to change this right now, and what we will do, we will create a short loop, a very basic loop, that basically puts this value into the variable name. So we will rename variable 5 as education spending 1960, variable 6 will be education spending 1961, and so on and so forth. Let's do that. So the way we do this is we look at the logic that there is currently. So we want this first variable to be called spending education in year 1960. Okay, and it currently has 5 in the variable name, and it has 1960 in the variable name. And here it increases, so this goes up by 1, so it's named variable 6, and this is 1961, 7, 62, 8, 63. Okay, so there's always a difference of 5, and we can actually use this property of the data, and we can create this loop. This goes for values x, and x goes from 5 to, what's the last variable we have here? It's 64. It goes from 5 to 64. And we want the loop to do the following. So first of all, we compute the local macro that's called year. And this is defined as 1955 plus x. And then we are going to rename the variable x, and we're going to call it spend educ and then year. Okay, so this is the loop. For those of you who don't know loops, I will just explain now what this loop does. So the loop cycles over values that are called x, and these values range from 5 to 64. So whatever is in these brackets, so between this and this bracket, will be executed for all values of x, starting from 5 and going to 64. So the first thing this loop does, it computes a local variable that I call year, and the local variable is 1955 plus x. And then it renames the variable called vx by spending education and year. Okay, so let's think that through for a value of 5. So this will be the initial value of the loop. So if x is 5, it means we're dealing with variable 5 called v5. So this is v5, okay. The year is 1960. So local year will be created, which will be 1955 plus 5, so it will be 1960. So year will be 1960. And then the variable called v5 will be renamed to spend educ and then 1960, which is exactly what we want. Okay, let's think through what happens if x is 6. Then local year will become 1961, so 1955 plus 6. And the variable called variable 6 will be renamed spend education 1961. Okay, we select the entire loop, we hit Ctrl D, and we don't get any useful output, which is, yeah, sometimes it's a bit a problem. You don't really see what the command did because it's in a loop, but we see already here that all these variables have been renamed automatically, and they go from 1960 to 2019. And now if we look at the data editor, we see that the variables have been changed, and we can even verify. For instance, here it says 77, so this variable has to be 77 as well. So the next step now is to drop unnecessary observations. And here you have to be pretty careful, because you usually don't want to drop observations unless you're like 100% positive that there's nothing useful in them anymore. And this is now the case for the first 3 observations actually, because everything that's in here is either empty, like the first 2 rows, or it's just redundant, because we made the 3rd row redundant by just adding the year to our variable name. So we're just going to drop those first 3 observations from the data set. The way to do this is we just say drop if n is smaller than 4. So n, you have to think of, it's like a variable that's in each data set contained. You don't see it, but the n for the first row is always 1, the n for the second row is always 2, the n for the third row is 3, etc. So if we say drop if n smaller 4, we select the command, we go Control D. We get here the information that 3 observations were deleted. And if we look into the data set, we now have just the, it starts with the first country name. The data starts with the first country name. We got rid of the first 3 empty observations. Okay, so now we have cleaned the data, I would say. The next step we're going to take is we're going to reshape the data set. So right now in the first column we have country. So you have to think of each row as basically all the responses for Aruba are in this one row. Okay, so Aruba in 1960, Aruba 1961, 62, etc. All this is in one single row. Depending on your analysis, you can actually work with this data. You don't have to reshape it. But usually when you work with panel data, you want to bring your data in something called long format. So instead of having one observation that's called Aruba, and then it gives you all the values for each year on the right hand side, we will want one observation of Aruba for each year. So we want to have many times Aruba in the first column, and then we want to have 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, and then we want a third column that says spending in education in that year. So to reshape the data, we're going to use the reshape command. Reshape the data. And we will reshape from wide to long format. And we do this with the command reshape long. The variable is called spend educ. We do this over each country, and we generate new variable called year. We select this, we go Control D, and when we get the output here, so this says that J equals the years. We see what happened with the data set. So before we had 264 observations, now we have 15,840. And before we had 61 variables, and now we have only 3. Now we go and browse again, and we get what we wanted. So for instance, we have for Afghanistan, we have in each year one observation. So for 1960 to 1970, the spending on education is missing. And then for 1971, the spending on education is here, it's 1.16, etc. This should go up all the way to 2019. Yeah, there we go. And then the next country comes, which in this case is Albania. And we have this for each country. So the data is now in long format, which is useful for a lot of applications where you want panel data and where you want each observation to reflect one country year. Okay, so now what we can also do is we can drop the missing observations. This is, however, I mean, this is subjective. That's up to you what you do with the missing data. In our case, spend educ, if we just type, like, let's say sum spend educ, we hit enter, we have 4,602 observations, and in total we have 15,840 observations. So this variable is actually missing for a lot of observations. So we only have it for a bit less than 1/3 of the data. But still, if we want to get rid of all those empty values in this column, what we type is just drop if me stands for missing, and then we go with the respective variable. We select this, we go Control D, and all those observations are deleted now. And as I said, we retain 4,602 observations. If we look at the browser, we have a complete data set now with not a single missing observation. Okay. So the second last step is I just call it cleanup. It's good practice to label your variable. Because let's say you open this data set like in a month or so, and you see this variable, it's called spend educ, and you have no more clue what this is. You don't know where it comes from. You think it's maybe, is it millions, is it billions, is it a percentage, is it the percentage of GDP, is it GDP per capita, what is this? So that's why it's a good idea to actually label your variables. And I feel a bit lazy, so I'm just gonna copy this, and I tell Stata var, which means label variable, spend educ, and then I just input the entire text. And I also add that this is from World Bank, source World Bank. All right, we select this, Control D, and now the label has been added. And if we hit D for describe, we see here the variable label that this is in total of percentage of GDP. It's the expenditure on education in percent of GDP, and that is from the World Bank. So that gives us a bit more information on the data set. So okay, the very last step, step G, is saving this data set, which we have modeled, which we have cleaned now. So I like to run compress command before. So what compress does, let's show you here. We type compress, enter. Okay, 0 bytes saved, so we didn't save any space, but basically you can reduce the file size sometimes by a lot just by typing this one word, so it's quite useful to have. And then we will save our data set, and let's call it save education spending, and we hit replace. We type replace. The replace just tells us tells Stata to overwrite the file named education spending if it already exists. So we select this, we go Control D, and it says file education spending not found because this file didn't exist before. And then it says file education spending DTR saved, so it's now saved, and that's about it. If we go back here, we now have this file called education spending, which we just saved right now, and we have this do file called education, which is the file we are working in. So make sure to also save the do file. Alright, that's basically it for today's video. I hope you learned something. One last thing, why did we work in the do file editor at all? So look at the amount of information we have stored here. So we have some code, like these lines, like this stuff, but we also have some notes. These are just our annotations, like what does each step do. And I think that's really the way you want to work, because the good thing is, let's say if I don't want to drop those with missing spending. Let's say I want to do that now. If I didn't have all of that stored, I really couldn't get back to the state that the data set is in here now. Okay, so okay, we imported the data, we cleaned the data, we dropped unnecessary observations, then we did the reshape command. And now I actually want to keep all those with missing observation. So the cool thing about the do file is all I have to do is I just type a star here so that this step gets actually skipped. And I just run the entire do file, Control D, and that's it. I now have 15,000 observations. If I browse them, I see that the missing are still there. Beautiful, all right. Or let's say we drop again the missing ones, but we don't want to rename this country, this variable, but we want to rename it geography or something. Okay, I just edit the do file. I hit Control A, I hit Control D. Variable country not found. That's nice. So of course then we have to adjust it throughout the code. So I call that geography. Let me find if there's more country. Nope. Okay, so Control A, Control D. That's it. I go browse, and the country name is now called geography. So that's why you should use do files. Like never work without do files, even for very small projects. All right, that's it for today. I'm just putting it back to country and I run it super fast, and that's it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet, and yeah, just let me know if any questions you might have, if something wasn't clear. Just let me know so I can help you with targeted answers. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye.